Lesson 8. This is the celebration of God's grace, part 2. What do you do when you've fallen so far behind in these lessons, in your workbook? Your workbook has blanks in it. Oh no! I know the feeling. I have fallen behind too. And what I really recommend that you do is you just pick up where we are now. Just start today with lesson 8. If you really want to, you can listen to the webinars from the weeks that you've missed, and that kind of wraps up or summarizes the material. You can also watch the videos for the weeks that you've missed because that looks forward. But don't obsess about having blanks in your workbook. In Jesus' day, I don't think that people would have been locked out of heaven for not having their workbook blanks all filled in. Let's extend grace to ourselves this week. And let's just dive in with this week's material. Get done what you can. One of the things about grace is we understand things like workbooks and webinars and tools. They are there to serve us. When we begin to feel burdened by them as if we must serve them, then we've got things out of kilter, out of whack, backwards. So I want to encourage you, are you looking at the workbook lesson as a servant, as your servant? Is it lifting you up? Is it wind beneath your wings? Is it supporting you in your journey? Or is it this constant burden that you feel like you're just going to die? No. This week, your assignment is, what are ways that you can extend grace to yourself? 3 ways you can extend grace to yourself. For instance, if the workbook lessons doing 1 every day is just too much for you, can you do 2 this week? If that's too much, then okay, that's fine too. If it's feeling like too much of a burden to show up for the webinar, download the audio and listen to it on your commute into work, or listen to it while you're on a walk, or listen to it some other time, or don't listen to it at all. It's perfectly okay. So what are 3 ways you can extend grace to yourself this week? Have you been using the observation and correction tool, or have you been stuck in observation and condemnation? We don't want to be stuck in condemnation. Condemnation does not encourage positive change. We cannot hate ourselves into positive change. If Jesus came into the world not to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him, then what are we doing condemning ourselves? Let's be Christ-like. Even Jesus does not condemn us. So what are we doing condemning ourselves? Let's stop that. So there's one way you can extend grace to yourself. Grace is not there to allow us to sin. Just like Paul says, shall we sin all the more so that grace may increase? May it never be. We don't want to go there. In fact, in Titus 2, we're told that the same grace that brings salvation teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions. I wouldn't have made it on this journey if I hadn't extended grace to myself. I wouldn't be here right now. All those videos, all those 100 and something videos wouldn't be there if I hadn't extended grace to myself. God has placed eternity in the heart of man, and that is that God-shaped void that we have inside of us that only God can fill. But that also is a longing for perfection. It's that longing for heaven. And when we twist it and warp it just a bit, it ends up being perfectionism. Perfectionism has its root in pride. And so very often we have this standard of excellence for ourselves, and that we think that we should have for ourselves. We might even think it's a godly trait. Yet does God have this standard for you in the areas that you think he does? Or does he want you to let go and be willing to be in process? I think that we miss that God's grace is pervasive. It covers a multitude of sins. God records in Scripture numerous accounts when his people railed at him, actually fussed at him, actually argued with him. Like, what is this about? Are you going to abandon us forever? God chose to record for all of history some of these arguments that his people had with him. That says a lot about grace. In fact, in the Psalms, not only are they recorded, but those are songs. That was the songbook for Israel. So God ordained, God planned in his sovereign, perfect goodness that Israel would sing about some of these things. That's amazing. There's an example of God's grace poured out. When you think of a number of the tools, the people that God had relationship with in the scriptures, the people that we see, grace is everywhere. I don't know what we're doing thinking that we should be exempt from grace. Christ went to the cross so that grace could be extended to us. So what is it that we're doing when we refuse to extend grace to ourselves? When we think a blank in our workbook isn't acceptable? When we think going past a 5 means we have to throw in the towel and quit? Our God is inviting us to step up into something beautiful and wonderful. And he does it in a way that is unique and precious and special. The keys to conscious eating, there are 8 of those. The first one is eating when your body is hungry. And the 8th one of those is stopping when you're satisfied. So this is the way I look at it. My primary boundary are keys 1 and 8. That's my primary boundary. Now, keys 2 through 7 include things like reduce the number of distractions in order to eat in a calm environment. Eat when sitting down. Eat when my body and mind are relaxed. Eat and drink the food and beverages my body enjoys. Pay attention to my food while eating. And number 7 is eat slowly and savor each bite. I view those as secondary boundaries. We are not under law. We are under grace. So these aren't rules. These are guidelines. They're helpful. The idea is for them to serve you, not you to serve them. But keys 1 and 8 are the primary boundary, eating at hunger and stopping when satisfied, 0 and 5. And all the other keys to conscious eating, numbers 2 through 7, are there to help you be aware of when you're approaching 5. They're there to help you enjoy fellowship with the Lord as you eat. So the observation and correction chart, actually you can keep track of, am I mindful of the Lord during my meal? Is my mind at peace? Have I created as quiet an environment as I possibly can? Extend grace to yourselves. Some of you are parents of 6 children. That's not going to be a peaceful environment. Not like somebody who has an empty nest like moi. So extend grace to yourself. And even if your environment is kind of busy, your heart can be quieter. You can quiet your heart. Allow yourself to not be that perfectionist at meal times. Allow yourself to enjoy God's fellowship at meal times. Allow yourself to have a welcome, inviting spirit instead of a perfectionist. We will have compliance at all costs. The way I recommend that you use the observation and correction chart is every time you follow one of the keys to conscious eating that are listed in the observation and correction chart, just make a star or an asterisk or a little mark of some sort. I call any time I eat a meal, okay? So even if I only eat to a 2 on the hunger scale, it's a meal because it's an opportunity to nourish my body. And I will put my mark inside next to each one of those keys to conscious eating. At the end of the day, I have a chart that shows me, have I been mindful? Have I stopped at 5? Have I allowed myself to focus on the food? Have I chosen foods that I enjoy eating? If you see any keys that don't have your mark in them consistently, then you know that that might be something to give special attention to during the next meal or the next day. Again, extend grace to yourself. If this tool isn't serving you, let me say that again. If this tool isn't serving you, if you are serving the tool, something is seriously wrong, and you do not want to do that. Don't turn any of the keys to conscious eating into a law or any of the tools into a tool to hit yourself over the head with. Don't go there. Let's extend grace to ourselves. Let's throttle the dog. Grace! Grace. My animals have taught me so much about grace. I think I've told you guys that before. What? Oh, be nice. Be nice. Be nice. Yeah, much better. Okay. So this week, you want to be sure to extend grace to yourself because, where would we be without grace? Well, I know where this dog would be without grace. Death row. Anyway.